Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this video that's going to address topic 5, which is a rather personal topic for me, as you no doubt have learnt so far that my thesis is focused on emotions in teaching, and this topic, emotions, is certainly a large part of the learning here when you engage with the Bright modules, although it forms part of a larger constellation of, I guess, personal and professional development that you can undergo doing the Bright modules. Emotions, resilience, relationships, etc. Form that nexus of improving your skills, knowledge and skills in regards to those aspects of teaching. Now, if you haven't engaged with the Bright modules, I recommend that you do so. Mostly not necessarily around the fact that, it can teach you something valuable, which may result. For some people, they may go through it and not necessarily get a whole lot of value out of it. I think it would depend on the person. But I think what's important is that it might start to raise some questions for yourself in regards to these ideas of what's critical for teachers to know and to practice. And certainly around this idea of resilience and what is it? Why do teachers need it? Can you learn it? Are you already bringing in a whole range of attributes to teaching in which you may come already quite resilient? Now, I'm not necessarily going to focus my video on resilience per se, because I wouldn't say I'm an expert. There are certainly experts in the field, of which my actual primary supervisor, Dr. Susan Beltman, if you're doing her unit, she's the best person to ask about resilience. She's got some great papers as well. If you search Dr. Susan Beltman's research on Google, you can find some of her papers on resilience. There's a very good one that summarizes as a bit of a literature review on resilience research. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on resilience. I think it's an interesting concept. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of understanding resilience within a psychodynamic perspective, which I find a lot of the research is focused on. I think resilience is a concept that we've created for a very particular reason, mostly around this notion of, when we talk about resilient people or resilient communities, or even, resilient nations, what does that mean? What are we actually talking about? And how do we then come to understand what practices people do to make them resilient or not resilient? And how do we categorize that? And I think people quite quickly work out who or what is resilient and who or what isn't resilient. And I think that can become a bit of a label for some people, perhaps. But anyway, as I said, I don't necessarily want to dwell on resilience. I think, obviously, for me, the social, emotional relationships side of the Bright modules, or certainly this topic, is more in my wheelhouse. In fact, it's so much in my wheelhouse that you wouldn't think so, but it's actually quite difficult to know where to start. Perhaps that's why I'm writing a 75,000 odd word thesis on emotions in teaching, and my thesis is focused specifically on pre-service teacher emotions, so the emotional dimensions of your experience as you learn to become a teacher, which I find incredibly fascinating. So where do we start? I think there's a few fundamentals that you can glean from the literature, and if you wish to know more about some of the literature or know where to go if you're interested in this topic a bit further, you can email me and I can send you some really good accessible journal papers. But there's a few key things that the literature identifies in regards to, say, if we're looking at teachers' emotions. One thing is certainly teaching involves emotional practice, and there's a great quote. I have to sort of attribute it and find it, and I will, and I'll put it in the video notes. But a researcher once said, anybody who is taught a single day knows the emotional practice of teaching, or understands it. And you will come to understand it if you've had some experiences teaching, whether it's tutoring or maybe even being a swim coach. You may have already experienced this to some degree. But as soon as you step inside a school, as soon as you walk inside a classroom and you start teaching a group of students, whether they listen or not, it is emotional practice. And there are a range of emotions around, and I'm not a fan of the binary, but nonetheless, it's easy to talk about. If we look at the positive side, the joy of teaching a really good lesson when it works well, of communicating your passion. Teachers often talk about passion and their passion for a content area, and certainly as a secondary teacher, a learning secondary teacher, you're passionate about a subject area that you want to communicate to your students. There's also love that's often talked about in regards to teaching, the love of even the learning process, the love of your students in a way, that kind of platonic love that you might develop when you build those really good relationships with them, and things just seem to work well. And obviously, and all other kinds of positive emotions associated with working as a teacher, and when practice seems to reinforce intention. So when you go into teaching, you may have a strong intention to impact the lives of young people, make a difference to them, communicate your subject matter passionately and richly, with lots of great learning opportunities. And when your practice then reinforces those intentions, so you go in wanting something and it becomes reinforced or fulfilled, that brings up all the positive emotions there and that sense of fulfillment. You look on the other side, which tends to be focused on a little more, because although we say yes, those positive emotions lead to a teacher wanting to sustain in the profession, oftentimes we're focused on what leads to attrition. Why are new teachers leaving? Why are so many new teachers leaving in the first 5 years? Why are so many new teachers getting to emotional exhaustion or reaching burnout, of which there are high rates of that in the first 5 years? Again, as a little aside, if you've watched Testing the Teachers, that SBS show that I've been posting on Facebook about, there is a whole section on emotions, and that one teacher at the very school that I taught for just shy of 4 years, there's two of them. There's another one later on in the program where they both encounter challenge and difficulty working with the young people, that things just don't seem to be working, and all of the emotions that get brought up with that, and both of them cry openly as a result of feeling inadequate or not meeting the intentions they were hoping to meet, etc. I think all of the teachers in one way or another encounter that on the show, which is very fascinating. So the negative emotions that are associated with teaching are many, and they can result from many different causes. So students behaviour management tends to cause frustration in teachers, even anxiety, because if you have one difficult class where students are misbehaving, whether it's non-compliance, whether it's bullying, whether it's other behaviours that make it very difficult to get your lesson done. If you experience that, there's in the moment emotions of why is frustration? Why isn't this working? Frustration at the students, even anger, all sorts of other negative emotions. And then the next time you have to teach that group of students, there's that turmoil of emotion, anxiety, a sense of what's going to happen. Am I going to fail like I did the last lesson? And is it going to get worse? So again, that then it accumulates, and then you can see if that goes on for weeks or months or years, how teachers quickly become exhausted by it, because it's that. They often call it emotional roller coaster teaching, has that too. So the ups and downs, in a way, cause exhaustion. So students and learning not working well can be a result of some negative emotions and exhaustion. But students aren't the only cause of significant negative emotions. There's staff room politics ends up being a primary reason many new teachers cite as a reason they either think about leaving or a reason that they do leave. So oftentimes you can manage or reconcile or create strategies around classroom management and working with students, and you can keep trying new things and you get through and you have small wins, etc. I can tell you from personal experience that the staff room dynamic, the dynamics between your colleagues, your teacher colleagues, and the internal politics of a staff room, and what goes on with the power plays and the cliques and the groupings and the administration, either providing edicts or regulations or rules that you have to follow that you may not agree with, union politics, etc., etc. All of that stuff of teaching that really no one prepares you for until you become a really full-time teacher. You get a little bit of it during your professional experience. You see shades of it, but only until you're really working in a school and you then identify as, I am a staff member of the school, and you become part of the power dynamics much more significantly. It is only then that some of those negative emotions start to arise out of those kinds of relationships. That again, it accumulates over time. But and as a personal example, for myself, experiencing at a couple of schools that I worked, where after a period of time, you just start to feel incredibly annoyed, frustrated, somewhat debilitated by some of that political power game. And then when you get caught up in it, I used to step back and go, how come I just did that? How come I just, bitched about that person behind their back, or whatever the case is, or made a decision or a choice or made a move against someone because I could get something out of it. And that goes on a lot in schools. And I mean, in some schools, I should say, not all schools. There's some schools where there's a lot of staff cohesion and harmony, and it works really well. There tends to be quite a strong principal or leader that directs that. But a school is like any workplace, and for those of you all of you have undoubtedly had other jobs and worked in different contexts, and you know that workplace politics happens everywhere. It's just part of humans grouping together, and although you're all there to achieve the same goal, there can be complex reasons why people choose to do what they do and perhaps undermine some of those goals. So that can be a reason why some teachers reach emotional exhaustion, is that staff room politics. Sometimes there's broader forces at play that can lead to teachers' emotions. And again, thinking about the negative ones, some of the work that we've done early on in this unit around that kind of cultural, political stuff that goes on in schools, under resourcing disadvantaged schools if you're in the country, and our family life of students. That community aspect, familial community aspect as well, is very strong. Seeing students that may have been victims of abuse, where child protection services can't intervene, all sorts of really complex human messiness that goes on, that you as the teacher end up fronting to, that you are there, right there, facing some of the stuff that goes on underneath, some of the darker things that go on in every society across the globe. Sometimes we're in positions where we don't see that, or removed from that, or it happens to somebody else. When you're a teacher, you come to face and front that in a very meaningful way, and you become somewhat of a change, or you may see yourself somewhat as a change agent within that. So how can I help this person? You may ask yourself, can I help this person? Is it possible? And new teachers often talk about that feeling of helplessness, a very strong emotional response of feeling hopeless and helpless. They sort of come together around that they don't seem to be able to, they don't know how much they can do. Can they do anything with that student who's self-harming, for example? Because there are mechanisms in the school to help that. So as an individual teacher, you're not a counsellor, you're not a psychologist, you may not even be part of the student services, because there's a whole team of student services that may deal with that child. But you may perhaps, if we take the example of self-harm, you perhaps see the students' cuts and scars in class, or they may disclose or divulge something to you about that, or make it very obvious that that's what they're dealing with, which some teenagers, that's what they do. They make it very obvious that some of their issues, not to say that they aren't real, but that it's part of their identity, some of those particularly mental health problems. So again, that's another site by which teachers undergo much emotional sort of tension and turmoil, and they have to negotiate their roles around that and their own emotions. So that's what the literature, all this literature has said in regards to what teachers experience. I'm also talking about my own experiences and also the research I'm doing. I've been citing some examples of events and experiences of the pre-service teachers that I've talked to in the past. But another strong aspect of the literature that comes through when you investigate the emotions of teachers is this concept of emotional labour. So emotional labour was first conceptualised by a researcher by the name of Ali Hochschild. And not that she looked at teachers, but Hochschild focused on a range of different professions, and her most famous case was actually her work with airline hostesses. So this was in the 80s, and she talked to a lot of airline hostesses about their emotions, about what they did with their emotions and how they used emotions in their work. And she came up with this concept of emotional labour. And what this meant was that if we think about an airline hostess, they have to do their job where they have to appear a lot of the time as having a pleasant demeanour. It's obviously not just airline hosts. There's a lot of service industries where this is true, where your outer surface, what she called surface acting in regards to emotion of pleasantness, a smile, congenial manner, politeness in the face of sometimes impoliteness and incongeniality. So they have to learn a skill to form of labour in regards to their work, because they're paid for that service, in which that's part and parcel of their professional or their work. So she sort of talked about that surface acting as being a kind of labour. There's also another kind of labour that exists around a kind of deeper acting that she found that airline hostesses had to do, and many other kinds of professionals do this as well, in which you come to actually shift and change your own internal emotions because it benefits the work that you're doing. So where an airline hostess may smile and be pleasant, but inside is like, oh, this person is just so frustrating. They're being very rude, and that really is causing a lot of anger and frustration in me, but they're still smiling. That's surface acting. When we undergo deep acting, we're actually reformulating our emotions in regards to understanding, well, what do I have to do to be competent here? So I'll talk about teachers, because the teachers undergo a lot of this deep acting and surface, by the way. And in fact, they can happen, sort of one or the other on different times and different days. But very quickly, new teachers realize that they have to transform or conduct a kind of labour on their own emotions in regards to expressing certain emotions that are acceptable. So I guess a good example of this is again, if we look at frustration and anger around classroom management, which is often one of the first kind of intense emotions you'll probably experience on the job. So if you confront a challenging student who's being non-compliant and they're verbalizing their non-compliance, and maybe at first you do a bit of surface acting there, you sort of, you're trying to be calm, but inside there's all the nerves, racking nerves of, oh, what's going on here, and can I handle this? And so you're trying to a cool exterior, as it were, to manage the student's behavior. So that's surface acting. Then eventually what starts to accumulate if the student, say, continues their non-compliant behavior, and frustration may occur, and even anger at the student, that they're constantly disrupting this classroom that you're trying to teach. And what you start to do is you realize quickly that if you express that anger, if you shout and bellow and yell at them, if you carry on and really have a go at them, it actually would likely be detrimental, not just to your relationship with the student, but if you really express that anger, other students would sort of look at you and go, well, maybe that teacher's a little bit crazy, and where you think perhaps that might help your classroom management, it could erode your classroom community and all of that sort of stuff. And you learn this at university, you'll see it in practice in schools. So what starts to happen is you go, okay, how do I manage and control that anger? And then you start to, you can see here how it's a form of labor, it's a form of work. It's like you're constantly flexing a kind of muscle, like almost like a bricklayer would. They're constantly practicing and flexing their muscles in a way to get better. You start flexing that control, that sort of professional demeanor starts to shift on the inside, and you start to work out, actually, maybe I need to practice a form of detachment from this, and then you start to work out some strategies for yourself that you no longer feel that anger and frustration. So that's emotional labor, where there's the surface acting that goes on, and as well the deep acting, when you start to actually reformulate and shift and change those internal emotions based on organizational goals or the goals or outcomes that you need to achieve in order to either appear as professional or to get the work done and to actually make, say, learning happen in a classroom. So that's just one example. And there's lots of ways that this plays itself out in teaching. This kind of forum, the video, I don't have so much time as to explore. Again, this is why I'm writing a thesis on it. But one thing that's very interesting in that package of ideas I just went through for myself is this notion of emotional control and emotion management, and how new teachers come to see that as being a critical skill in the criteria around being professional or competent or effective, what that means in regards to what we do with our emotions as new teachers, or as, for yourself as practicing teachers. Who do you learn from, or what do you learn from in regards to that? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you reading that allows you to formulate for yourself a set of emotional rules about the profession, and have no doubt there are very strict emotional rules in the teaching profession. They can sometimes be implicit and unspoken, but they're definitely there. And new teachers will come to learn this very quickly, that emotional prudence, emotional control, even sometimes a clinical or neutral approach to teaching is accepted in a lot of ways. Yes, be passionate, infuse your lessons with joy. You certainly don't express raw or vulnerable emotions. At times, the more feminine emotions, and I'm also a feminist theorist in some ways, the more feminine emotions as opposed to the masculine emotions, the feminine emotions, anything that's raw or vulnerable, attached to sadness or crying or being overwhelmed by emotion, when you can't keep them in check, when you can't control them. Men tend to learn that to be a man is to control your emotions. So teaching, despite starting out as a feminine profession has become more masculinized over the years, I believe, that women, especially who are unable to control their emotions and express vulnerable emotions like crying, openly crying, where's the danger there? And many new teachers, and not just women, will hold themselves back from expressing that very raw and vulnerable kind of feeling because they're worried that it'll harm them professionally. So, there's that's all in the literature, and as well, I'm speaking from my own research here as well, which is it is confirming everything that the literature has said about teachers and their emotions, and perhaps some of the reasons why we have this high attrition rate, that the emotional dimensions of the work and the stress and the challenge of dealing with our emotions as teachers, perhaps some of those unrealistic expectations of how we manage and control them to appear professional is exhausting in itself, and perhaps leads to quicker burnout. And that may be part of my thesis and some of the conclusions I bring together around it. So might just pause this here, think about the next part of what I want to say, and we go from there.